Hello, and welcome to our next lesson in the series of lessons on plants, what they look like, and how they work. The topic of today's lesson is looking at transpiration in plants. Have you ever thought about why does this happen when you put a plant in a plastic bag or a glass bottle? Well, today we're going to find out. Now we're going to look at the concept map of the topics that we will be covering in this lesson and the next lesson. We are looking at plants. In the last lesson, we looked at the structure of leaves, stems, and roots. What we are doing this time is we are looking at their function. What do they actually do? And most of it is to do with water. We're going to start off with leaves, which we studied in the last lesson. And leaves use water for photosynthesis, and they lose water. And those two topics are what we're going to be looking at in this lesson. The other parts of the plant and what they do with water will be the topic of the next lesson. To be able to understand this section, you need to know certain concepts from the previous lesson. For example, you need to know what all the different parts of the plant look like and what types of tissues are found in them. You also need to know two very important concepts that you should have done earlier in the year, which is diffusion, which is how substances move from a high concentration to a low concentration, and the other one is osmosis, which is how water moves through membranes. To make sure you understand this, I'm briefly going to revise those two concepts. First one is diffusion. You should have done this in natural science earlier on in high school, and that is how molecules move from a high concentration to a low concentration. If we look at this example, if a drop of syrup is placed into a beaker of water, within a short space of time, those little syrup molecules would have spread throughout the entire beaker. And that is called diffusion. Diffusion can also occur through membranes as long as the molecules, for example, oxygen, can move freely through the membrane. If we look at this diagram, here is the experiment in the beginning with a high concentration of particles, say oxygen, outside the cell and nothing inside the cell. So we end up with a big concentration difference, a high concentration and a low concentration. What the particles then do is they move through the membrane from the high concentration to the low concentration. After time has passed, diffusion will stop because we have inside and outside the cell exactly the same concentration. The next one, which you should have done earlier on when you did the cell, is a process called osmosis. And osmosis is a type of diffusion, except it involves only water molecules and how they move through a semi-permeable membrane. Let's have a look at the example. Here we have, on this side, in this little square, lots of water molecules. In a square the same size On the other side of the membrane, we have fewer molecules. So this is a high concentration, this is a low concentration, and as you can see, the water molecules are moving through the little gaps in the membrane from a high concentration to a low concentration. But you might ask, what about the little red particles? Why don't they move from a high concentration to a low concentration? Let's see why. If you look at the size, and those represent, for example, sugar molecules, they cannot fit through the spaces in the membrane. So large molecules can't fit through the membrane, but smaller molecules can, and that's why we call it a semi-permeable or selectively permeable membrane. In this lesson, we are going to look at transpiration, which is how water is lost from the leaves of a plant. Where do the leaves get the water from? So this is transpiration, water being given off. Where does the water come from? It's got to come from the water in the soil, moving all the way into the roots, up the stem, and then into the leaves. And that's what we're going to be starting to look at today. To understand this, you need to remember what a leaf looks like. So we're going to do a bit of a revision on how or what the inside of a leaf looks like. So to start off, on the upper and lower surfaces, we have an epidermis with a waxy cuticle. In the center of the leaf, we have our mesophyll, some of which are long and closely packed, some of which are smaller and rounded, the spongy mesophyll, and the palisade mesophyll. Then, in between these cells, we have got substances being provided through the vein, namely water, and substances, namely carbon dioxide, moving in through the stomata. So, we're just getting started, but I think maybe you should take a breath and we can have a bit of a break before we really get into the depth of the material.